First of all, the credentials just mean that it took me a long time to get a job. Today's topic is shaping operating culture in times of transition, and particularly in the private equity space. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been spending personally most of my practice in some of the worlds that you folks operate in. And I'd like to start out with a little quiz, since you've all had coffee. Here are two operating companies, Acme and Apex. And if you can read that, Acme is kind of an old line company, strives for stability in all areas, process and systems very important, no surprises. And then there's Apex, kind of same industry, and very different, adaptable, planned chaos, and so on. And the question is, if you look at this, and another piece of information is they both are about the same in terms of performance, in terms of revenue, EBIT, profitability, and cash flow. And the question is, which has the best culture? And the answer is, you don't have enough information. And so this is one of the points that I want to be making throughout the morning. And it's culture for what? Rather than there's one optimal culture for any organization. And we'll be talking about that through the morning. So what are we going to talk about? I want to take a few minutes and talk and define what organizational culture is and why it's important. What is the right culture for an organization and how to make that determination. Culture change has a miserable failure rate, and we'll go through that. You're nodding your head. It's the voice of experience. And we'll go through some of the reasons why, and then talk, hopefully in a very practical way, on some things that you can do or your management can do to make an organizational change, whether it comes about at the point at which a company becomes an operating company or somewhere down the road can make that successful. We'll talk a little bit about the special case of private equity and the relationship of ownership to management, and then talk very briefly about acquisitions. In this case, it's acquisitions into an existing operating company rather than a new company or new ownership. And then we'll take time, a few minutes for questions, and then go on to the panel. So what is organizational culture and why is it important? Well, there's lots of different definitions of culture. The best one that I've been able to find is a very simple one. It's how we do things around here. And the key point in this is that culture is an accumulated set of behaviors. Culture is not just something that goes up on a wall with the mission statement. Culture is a set of behaviors. It's a set of typical behaviors that express what employees in the organization or in the subculture believe, espouse, care about, and value. So think about culture as a trailing indicator. And therefore, if you're trying to change the culture, the focus is not on the labels. The focus is on what behaviors do you want employees in various parts of your organization to be doing. Through that, the culture will unfold and will have a name. And it's a lot of little things. So let me give you an example that I hope this early in the morning isn't too graphic. Schiphol Airport is the major airport in Amsterdam. And they were spending an awful lot of money housekeeping in the men's rooms. And this was not only very costly for them, but it flew in the face of the Dutch belief that cleanliness is next to godliness. And that was a real problem for them. And they were constantly spending thousands and thousands of dollars having housekeeping come in and use the men's room, clean the men's room, because we all know, those of us who are of the male persuasion, our aim is really, really lousy. So up stepped a gentleman whose name, let me find this here, because it was a real person. His name was, I can't find it. He worked in maintenance, and he came up with a great idea. Does anybody know what the idea was?
The mosquito?
Well, you're close. It was a fly. Mosquitoes sting, flies don't. He recommended that they etch a fly on in every urinal in the airport. And what that did was that gave us guys something to aim at. And we did. And it solved the problem. They saved tens and tens and thousands of dollars in doing that. But most importantly, for the sake of our conversation today, it was consistent with the culture. And the culture was, this place is so clean. And more broadly, Dutch people are so tidy. And so the behavior change resulted in the cultural change rather than the other thing around. So where does organizational culture fit in to the change process? Well, this is an oversimplified flowchart, but we start with mission, vision, values, investment thesis. Who are we? Where do we want to go? And what do we believe in? Then we go to strategy. How are we going to get there? And I would argue that the next step, and we were talking about this earlier, starts with your senior talent, because where the top of the house goes, the rest of the organization typically is going to follow. It's not the only thing to do, but if you don't get that right, forget about anything else. And that leads to all of the other things and all of the other levers that you press, process and systems. And by process and systems, I don't just mean the formal ones of supply chain and IT, but also the informal ones of how are decisions made, how do people disagree, how are the conversations take place around the organization that result in change, leading to and culture underneath that, which we'll talk about in a minute, leading to execution and hopefully value creation. So let's define the pieces of organizational culture and, again, what some of those things might be. This is a definition that comes out of an organization that a guy named Dan Dennison put together several years ago. He has a survey that is pretty good. And these are the 4 elements that he measures. Mission, do we know where we're going? Consistency, do people behave in a typical way, in a consistent way that creates leverage? Involvement, are people aligned and engaged? And adaptability, are we listening to the marketplace? Pretty simple stuff. But what's the right culture for an organization? Even if Dennison's 4 elements are the right ones, there's no single right culture that encompasses every company. And back to Acme and Apex, it's culture for what? And this is the art of culture change. No one size fits all. Figuring out the right culture for an organization is a balancing act. And it's a balancing act between stability and flexibility. How stable do we want to be? How flexible do we want to be? How focused do we need to be in our organization with the outside world versus the internal world of the organization? And here are some examples up on the screen that will give you kind of some general guidelines. But let me give you a specific example. I'm working now with a satellite communication company, and it's one, without naming names, that has been on the front page of the newspapers and CNN and all of that very recently and currently. And they are, obviously, if you think about it, very asset intensive. And as an organization, particularly in their operation area, reliability of their network, their satellites, their uplinks, and their downlinks have to be bulletproof. So this is a company that, if you look at their culture, in most areas of their organization is very stable, and very internally focused on the reliability of their network, and they will spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to create that reliability. A different company, let's say a second stage IT company working on software, which is sales-driven, highly innovative, and very flexible, would be an external flexible. So if you kind of think about, again, where are we, where do we want to take the company, and think about your balancing act, you begin to start answering the question around what's going to work and what's going to be congruent and what isn't going to work, or where are things falling apart. In terms of private equity, most of the time when a company is acquired in a private equity space, the first task is, in some way, shape, or form, is to take costs out, increase financial controls, stabilize, clean up the balance sheet, and so on. As the hold periods, of many portfolio companies are increasing, and when I started working in private equity about 5 years ago, typically it was 2 to 4 years. Now it's 5, 6, 7. The balance sheet typically gets cleaned up in a couple of years or sooner, and then growth becomes an issue. And so when you think about private equity and you think about culture in operating companies, there is frequently a sequence of cultures based upon where you want to take the company at that particular point in time. So it's not a static process. Once we got it, and sometimes an appropriate culture becomes inappropriate over time. Another thing to be thinking about is changes in the marketplace. Anybody who has been engaged in the retail industry knows about the profound effect of e-commerce on retailing, and also the fact that most existing retailers have done a miserable job making that transformation, and they're still struggling with it. And if you look at the top retail companies from 10 years ago, very few of them are still on the list today. And those that are spent millions of dollars, again, getting there, and it was very, very painful. So the marketplace certainly changed in that industry. Another one that has changed more recently are the government contractors. The federal procurement process about 18 months ago, it was like a switch flipped. And it used to be that government contractors, if they did great work, and if they developed a strong relationship with the people who were being served, would get the repeat business. And it was, and they often worked together to develop the specs for the next line of contracts. About 18 months ago, again, the switch flipped, and price became the ruling factor. So in government contracting in most areas now, if an organization is deemed to meet minimum standards, then price rules. In addition to that, the people who are being served are not the key decision makers, it's the procurement folks. So the decision process and the deciders switched very, very quickly. And there's a portfolio company that I'm not at liberty to name right now, was right in that space, had been operating very successfully in the federal government space for years and years and years. And they got hit on the side of the head with most of their major contracts being in jeopardy, and they lost some of them. Now, this had a profound effect on the company, on its leadership, on how they ran the company, and they're still struggling with that. And I'll give an example of that in a few minutes. So, most change efforts do fail to perform. Somewhere in the range of 50%, 50, 60, depending upon the metric used. The failure rate is really, really high. And I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the reasons why, because I think that can give you some of the reasons why, or some of the ways that you can do something about it. I know you can't read the slides, so I'll help you. This is the result of an IBM study. And the green bars represent people-oriented challenges, or things that that organizations struggle with. And the red bar represents the more tangible challenges. And they surveyed many, many companies that were going through change process, and they found the following, that 4 out of the first 5 were in the people-oriented space, not in the tangible space. So the ones top to bottom are changing mindsets and attitudes, 58%. That was a significant challenge and a reason for failure. Corporate culture, 49%. Complexity is underestimated. They oversimplified the process, 35%. Then a red one, shortage of resources. And then back to the green, lack of commitment of higher management.